way, just 2 Republican House members today stood up against the idea that you can threaten the life of a colleague and not face any consequences for it. Only 2 voted to censure Arizona Republican Congressman Paul Gosar and strip him of his committee assignments for posting a Photoshop video depicting himself murdering Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and menacing President Biden with swords. He neither apologized to the Congresswoman today nor to fellow members. In fact, he again made light of the video on Twitter earlier today. He's out with a statement tonight boasting of being called a warrior by the former president and comparing himself to the murdered cartoonist of the French magazine Charlie Hebdo. And just a short time ago, he retweeted a tweet containing the very same clip that he was censured for. So much for any regrets, let alone remorse or decency. He has none. However, his fellow Republicans certainly have excuses for him or for doing nothing about him. Some don't make much sense, but you should see them all the same because they reflect the kind of hyper-aggressive, personalized, conspiratorial climate the video itself embodies. That and a sprinkling of hypocrisy on top. First, some quick perspective, which might help shed light on the hypocrisy. This was only the second time in a decade that a House member has been censured. The last time was December 2010, when Democrat Charlie Rangel was taken to account for ethics violations. Democrats actually led the effort, and a wide majority voted for censure. This time, only Congresswoman Liz Cheney and Congressman Adam Kinzinger voted yes. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, after a week of virtual silence, defended Gosar by pointing fingers elsewhere and neglecting the fact that the last censure vote was an example of Democrats disciplining themselves.
When a Democrat Congresswoman said Israel was hypnotized the world, that supporting Israel is all about the Benjamins, and that 9/11 was, some people did something. The Democrats actually defended her. Why? Rules for thee, but not for me.
We'll keep it honest, when Congresswoman Ilhan Omar tweeted those remarks, the House Democratic leadership condemned them, which she also apologized for, which did not stop Congresswoman Lauren Boebert today from launching a string of allegations against her and other unnamed colleagues.
The Jihad Squad member from Minnesota has paid her husband, and not her brother husband, the other one, over $1 million in campaign funds. This member is allowed on the Foreign Affairs Committee while praising terrorists. A Democrat chairwoman incited further violence in the streets outside of a courthouse. And then the cherry on top, my colleague and 3-month presidential candidate from California, who is on the Intelligence Committee, slept with Fang Fang, a Chinese spy.
Now, there are a lot of things that are inaccurate in those statements, but even going through them is going down a rabbit hole that's designed to deflect from the actual question at hand. Is it appropriate for a member of Congress to post a Photoshop video revenge fantasy in which he murders a colleague? Here's Congressman Andy Biggs trying to turn Congressman Gosar's efforts into art.
This is an anime. It is Shingeki no Kyojin. Highly popular, stylized, intended to demonstrate the alienation people feel, particularly young people, in their cultures. Now, does anime have violence? Yes. It's highly stylized violence.
That makes it okay. Now it's art, apparently. Or maybe it's just that Congress is a special place where threatening violence is okay.
My colleague just referenced the phrase any other environment, that there would be some consequences. Well, this is not any other environment. This is the House of Representatives. We have constituents who elect us, send us to Washington to represent them, engage in debate, engage in often heated discussions with each other.
This really wasn't a discussion, heated or otherwise, unless debate these days is conducted via an animated revenge fantasy. Speaking of which, Congressman Roy then segued into his own vision of payback when Republicans control the House.
And we're now getting into the business of chilling debate and discussion about censoring our members and going down the road of pulling each other off of committees. Where's this going to end? When Republicans are back in the majority, where's that going to end?
So by that reasoning, he's condemning the move against Gosar for being partisan, then perhaps threatening partisan retribution down the road. His colleague Don Bacon underscored that threat.
I just think it's a mistake to take people off committees because this is a precedent that the Democrats are going to have to live by when they're the minority. And I say that as someone I think it's bad for the institution. Retribution's not good, but I think it's going to happen.
By the way, Congressman Bacon is one of 13 Republicans who voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill and is now facing the threat of being stripped of their committee assignments by fellow Republicans. This one headline in the Washington Post opinion pages puts it, in today's GOP, voting for infrastructure is heresy, threatening violence is not. And at the end of the day, that's what this was. It wasn't robust political debate. It was the opposite. At the end of the day, it was reducing a human being, a colleague, to a fantasy cartoon murder victim.
What is so hard? What is so hard about saying that this is wrong? This is not about me. This is not about Representative Gosar, but this is about what we are willing to accept.
CNN's chief political correspondent Dana Bash joins us now. For anyone wondering, Dana, about the sincerity of what Gosar and his Republican allies said today, do they need to look any further than the fact that he retweeted that very same violent anime tonight?
No, they don't. It's complete defiance. And, you said that a lot of these Republicans defended him. It was some defense, but it was mostly deflecting from the reality of what he did. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the end there really boiled it down to the most basic question, a question that most Republicans said no to, which is it okay? Are you willing to condemn your colleague for threatening the life of another? Now, they say, some of them said it's art. I don't remember that defense coming out when a comedian did the same thing, a similar thing about a Republican president. I don't remember them saying that about countless other examples. And it is completely hypocritical. There's no question about it. When you talk about at its core what this was about, which was inciting violence, Anderson. It was inciting violence, and it shouldn't be done against any member, but it definitely shouldn't be done against somebody who we know has serious threats against her.
Were you surprised at just how hard Republicans went to the mat today in support of Gosar? I mean, it was only Cheney and Kinzinger who voted to censure. How much was that about him? How much of it was about not running afoul of the former president or Kevin McCarthy?
Yeah, I think some of it was not running afoul of the former president. Other was just the cultural moment that they think that they are in right now, which is don't get, from their perspective, I'm not saying that this is the reality that we're living in, but don't get railroaded by Democrats trying to tell us what to do or tell us what to say. That is not what was going on. What was going on was Democrats trying to use the means that they have in the House of Representatives to punish somebody for doing something that they believe was untoward. Having said that, I did speak with one Republican member who tends to be a lot more sympathetic to this kind of punishment, who said that if the resolution was just about a censure, there would have been a lot more Republican votes. But because it was a censure and taking him off committees, that perhaps is why it limited the vote to just 2 Republicans.
For all the false equivalency, do you think if Republicans take over the House after midterms next year, with McCarthy possibly becoming Speaker, they're going to go after Democrats who they called out today?
Would not surprise me. There is absolutely no shame left. The notion of irony is pretty much gone these days. And the fact that you have Republicans in their, Congresswoman Boebert is a great example. I mean, in her defense, and you were absolutely right not to go down the rabbit hole of trying to fact check all of them, but the Jihad Squad, I mean, are you kidding me? Just that term alone in any other time might be enough to have leadership say, condemn it, or maybe even go even further to have some kind of condemnation.